Did you know there's a creature so mysterious that it can take off its own head, place it on its lap, and braid its hair? Buckle up, because I'm about to share with you the spine-chilling tale of Neka. Once upon a time, in a quiet village named Umuego, there was a school where girls from different towns came to learn. They lived together in a big hostel, sharing stories, food, and secrets. Among these girls was a quiet and beautiful girl named Neka. Neka had the most beautiful hair anyone had ever seen. It was long, thick, and shiny, and she always had the prettiest hairstyles. Her hair was so perfect that all the other girls envied her. They would ask, "Neka, how do you make your hair look so beautiful?" Neka would just smile and say, "It's a secret." Every night, while other girls struggled to braid their hair or tie it into neat buns, Neka would sit quietly in her corner, her back turned to everyone. The girls would watch her from a distance, wondering how she did it. But no one ever saw her brush her hair, use any special creams, or even ask for help. Yet, every morning, her hair would be arranged in a new, breathtaking style. Some girls even tried to sneak a peek at night, but Neka was always too quick, covering her head with a cloth or pretending to be asleep. One day, a new girl named Ada came to the hostel. She was friendly and eager to make friends, but she was also very curious. When she saw Neka's hair, she was amazed like everyone else. "Neka, your hair is so beautiful. Will you teach me how to style mine like that?" Ada asked eagerly. Neka smiled but gave her the same answer. "It's a secret," she said softly. Ada didn't give up easily. She decided she would find out Neka's secret, no matter what. She started watching Neka closely, noticing every little thing she did. She even tried to sit close to her at night, but Neka always found a way to keep her distance. One night, Ada couldn't sleep. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Neka's secret. Then, she heard a soft rustling sound. Slowly, she turned her head towards Neka's bed. There, in the dim light of the moon, she saw something that made her heart skip a beat. Neka was sitting on her bed, her back to Ada, but something was different. Ada squinted her eyes and gasped softly. Neka was holding her head in her hands. Neka had taken off her head and placed it on her lap. With one hand, she held a comb, and with the other, she carefully braided her hair. Her neck was bare, where her head should have been, and Ada could hardly believe what she was seeing. She wanted to scream, but fear held her voice in her throat. Neka's hands moved quickly, weaving her hair into the most intricate design. When she was done, she gently placed her head back on her neck, as if nothing had happened. Then, she lay down and covered herself with a blanket. Ada didn't sleep at all that night. She lay in her bed, trembling, trying to understand what she had just seen. The next morning, Neka was as beautiful as ever, her hair perfectly styled, and no one else seemed to notice anything strange. But Ada knew the truth, and it scared her. For days, Ada avoided Neka, afraid of what she had seen. But the other girls noticed her strange behavior and started asking questions. "Ada, what's wrong? Why are you acting so strange?" they asked. Ada wanted to tell them, but she was too afraid. What if Neka found out? What if something bad happened to her? So, she kept quiet, but the fear inside her grew. She couldn't eat, she couldn't sleep, and she started to look pale and sickly. The other girls grew worried. "Ada, you need to tell us what's going on. We're your friends," they said. Finally, one night, Ada couldn't take it anymore. She gathered a few of the girls she trusted the most and told them what she had seen. At first, they didn't believe her. "You're just imagining things," one girl said. "Maybe you were dreaming," said another. But Ada was serious. "I know what I saw," she insisted. Neka took off her head and combed her hair. The girls exchanged worried glances. If what Ada was saying was true, then Neka was no ordinary girl. She was something else, something not human. But what could they do? If they confronted Neka, who knew what she might do to them? So, they decided to watch Neka together, to see if Ada was telling the truth. That night, they pretended to go to sleep, but they kept one eye open, watching Neka's every move. And just as Ada had said, in the middle of the night, Neka sat up in her bed, took off her head, and started combing her hair. The girls watched in horror, their hearts pounding in their chests. They wanted to run, to scream, but they were too scared to move. When Necker finished, she put her head back on and lay down to sleep. The girls could hardly believe what they had seen. Necker, the beautiful girl with the perfect hair, had a terrifying secret. The next morning, the girls huddled together, whispering about what they had seen. They were too scared to go near Necker, and they didn't know what to do. Should they tell the teachers? Should they run away? But who would believe them? Necker noticed the way the girls were acting. She could see the fear in their eyes, and she knew that they had discovered her secret. That night, as the girls lay in their beds, trembling with fear, Necker spoke softly from her corner of the room. "I know what you saw," she said. "And now, you must promise to keep my secret, or else." The girls held their breath, terrified of what Necker might do next. But Necker only smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "If you keep my secret," she whispered, "nothing will happen to you. But if you tell anyone..." The girls nodded quickly, too scared to say anything. They didn't dare speak of what they had seen again. They kept Necker's secret, but the fear stayed with them, a dark shadow that haunted them every night. As time passed, the girls became more distant, no longer as close as they once were. They couldn't forget what they had seen, and the knowledge of Necker's secret hung over them like a heavy cloud. They couldn't trust each other anymore, and even though they kept Necker's secret, they knew that their lives would never be the same. But Necker, with her beautiful hair and sad smile, continued to live among them, a quiet girl with a terrifying secret that none of them would ever dare to reveal. One evening, just as the sun was setting and the shadows grew long, Necker came to Ada. Her eyes were filled with an emotion Ada couldn't understand, a mix of sadness and something more. "Ada," Necker said softly, "I didn't mean to scare you." Ada, still fearful, didn't know how to respond. She stared at Necker, her heart pounding in her chest. "I have to keep my secret," Necker continued, "but I want you to know that I'm not like this by choice. There's a reason, a story behind why I am the way I am." Ada, despite her fear, felt a strange sense of pity for Necker. She had always thought of Necker as someone to admire, to envy, but now she saw that Necker carried a heavy burden. "I don't want to hurt anyone," Necker whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "I just want to be like everyone else." Ada didn't know what to say. She had never imagined that Necker, with her perfect hair and mysterious ways, could feel so alone. The other girls noticed the change in Ada. She no longer seemed as fearful of Necker, and slowly, they too began to see Necker in a different light. But the fear of her secret still lingered, a shadow that they couldn't shake off. Then one night, something unexpected happened. A terrible storm hit the village. The wind howled, and the rain poured down like never before. The girls huddled together in their beds, frightened by the raging storm. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the hostel. The roof had been blown off by the wind, and the girls screamed as water poured in. Necker, seeing the danger, leapt into action. She grabbed a large sheet and ran out into the storm, using her strength to hold the sheet over the girls, protecting them from the rain. Her hair, usually so perfect, was drenched, but Necker didn't care. She fought against the wind, determined to keep her friends safe. The other girls watched in amazement. Necker, the girl they had feared, was now risking her own life to save them. They quickly joined her, holding the sheet together, and with Necker's guidance, they managed to keep the storm at bay until help arrived. When the storm finally passed, the girls were exhausted but safe. Necker was soaked to the bone, her hair tangled and messy, but she didn't seem to care. She smiled at the other girls, and for the first time, they saw her not as someone to fear, but as a true friend. From that night on, things changed in the hostel. The girls no longer feared Necker as they once did. They started to see her as more than just a girl with a strange secret. She was brave, kind, and willing to put others before herself. Slowly, they began to treat her like a sister, someone they could trust and rely on. But even as things seemed to get better, the weight of Necker's secret never fully went away. Ada, who had been the first to discover the truth, often found herself wondering about Necker's past. Why could she take off her head? How did she end up this way? And what was the full story that Necker had hinted at that night? One evening, after the storm, Ada gathered her courage and approached Necker while she was sitting alone under a tree, watching the sunset. "Necker," Ada began hesitantly, You said there was a reason why you can do what you do. Can you tell me about it? Necker looked at Ada, her eyes deep and filled with an emotion Ada couldn't quite name. For a moment, she was silent, as if considering whether to share her story. Then she sighed and nodded. I think it's time you knew the truth. Necker began to speak, her voice low and soft. I wasn't always like this, she said. I was once a normal girl, just like you, living in a village not far from here. My mother was a hairdresser, the best in our village. She could create the most beautiful hairstyles, and people would come from far and wide to have their hair done by her. She taught me everything she knew, and I loved learning from her. Necker paused, her eyes distant, as if she was seeing a memory from long ago. But one day, a strange woman came to our village. She was tall and had eyes that seemed to look right into your soul. She asked my mother to braid her hair, but when my mother tried, she found that the woman's hair was not like any hair she had ever touched before. It was like touching smoke, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't braid it. The woman grew angry, Necker continued, her voice trembling slightly. She accused my mother of not being skilled enough and cursed her. She said that my mother's daughter, me, would never be able to make beautiful hairstyles unless she gave up something precious. Necker looked down at her hands, her voice barely above a whisper. That night, I felt strange. My head felt heavy, and when I touched it, it came off in my hands. I was terrified, but I soon realized that as long as my head was off, I could create any hairstyle I wanted, even ones more beautiful than my mother's. But the curse was real. I could only make these hairstyles by removing my head, and if anyone found out, terrible things would happen. Ada listened in stunned silence, her heart aching for Necker. She couldn't imagine how it must have felt to live with such a burden, to carry a secret so heavy. So that's why you always kept to yourself, Ada said softly. You were afraid of what might happen if anyone knew. Necker nodded. Yes. But now that you and the others know, I'm scared. I don't know what will happen next. Ada reached out and took Necker's hand, squeezing it gently. We won't let anything bad happen to you, Necker. We're your friends, and we'll protect your secret. You don't have to be alone anymore. Necker looked at Ada, tears glistening in her eyes. Thank you, Ada. That means more to me than you can ever know. From that day forward, Ada and the other girls stood by Necker, helping her whenever they could. They made sure no one else ever discovered her secret, and they did their best to make her feel like she belonged. But as the days passed, something strange began to happen. The girls noticed that Necker's hair started to lose its shine. It became dull and lifeless, and no matter what Necker did, it wouldn't stay beautiful. Necker grew worried, afraid that the curse was changing, that something terrible was about to happen. The other girls could sense Necker's fear, and they too began to worry. They wanted to help, but they didn't know how. All they knew was that Necker's secret was beginning to take its toll, and they had to find a way to break the curse before it was too late. One day, Ada had an idea. Necker, she said, maybe we should go back to the village where you lived, where the curse started. Maybe there's someone there who can help us. Necker hesitated, fear flickering in her eyes. But what if it's too dangerous? What if the woman who cursed me is still there? Ada shook her head. We have to try. We can't let the curse destroy you, Necker. We'll go together, and we'll find a way to make things right. Necker looked at her friends, who nodded in agreement. For the first time in a long while, she felt a glimmer of hope. All right, she said softly. We'll go. And so, Necker, Ada, and the other girls set off on a journey back to the village where Necker's story had begun. They didn't know what they would find, or if they would even survive the dangers that awaited them. But they knew one thing for sure, they would face whatever came their way together, united by the bond of friendship and the determination to save Necker from the curse that had haunted her for so long. As they walked down the dusty path, with the sun setting behind them and the dark shadows of night creeping in, they knew that their adventure had only just begun. The journey ahead would be full of challenges, but they were ready to face them, because deep down, they believed that somewhere out there, a way to break the curse awaited them.